pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With liberty and justice for all.
With liberty
and justice for all.
With liberty and justice for all.
The United States Army: Banks Anderson, Kenneth Barrett, Herb Carson, Wes Carson, Dick DeCamp, Frederick Doan, Harvey Dunleavy, Oswald Ganley, Bernard Guten, Maya Harrington, Ted Harris, William E. Kearney, Tom Keller, James Klausman, Bill Leonard, Arnie Lerman, Sidney Levine, Joseph Martin, Paul McBride, Dick Miller, James Rabenhorst, Albert Saffold, Walton Smith, Donald Williams, a member of our staff, George Williams, and Vance Wonderly, also a member of our staff.
United States Navy: Dennis Blair, Michael Bracey, Robert Bridges, Craig Daniels, Alex Denson, Bill Griffith, Ken Haslam, Jack Hughes, Bob Jennings, Greg Lockhead,
Dean McCumber, Lloyd Reddick, Eric Reed, Ed Rimmers, Ray Ritz, Sean Rogers, Madison Spock, Wes Steen, Tom Vale, Harold Vick, Bob Wilkinson, Chuck Wilson.
United States Marine Corps: Chuck Cushman, Bill Losey, Stephen Koff, Bill Louv, Marcia Spellman, Vance Wonderly, Bob Sudduth.
United States Air Force: Donald Berlin, Al Bueller, Lee Downs, John Duval, Eugene Kalinsky, Victor Moore. United States Public Health Service, Harold Dunlap, Lowell Goldsmith, Larry Intervenson, Charles King, Gerald Lazarus.
George Williams, welcome to our session this afternoon. We are delighted to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
I would mention that it seems to me that looking at the records we have on the veterans for us to do, you may have served longer than anyone else in the Second World War, although I'm not clear about that. There were a number of pilots who used to be here who are no longer with us. So George, tell us about your Army career.
Well, I was at Yale in my undergraduate year, in my sophomore year, I guess it was, when the bomb dropped, and we carried on. We had a junior year in the summer, and we completed our junior year at Christmas in '44, and I came back home to my residence in Charleston and South Carolina, and we called up. I had volunteered for the Army Specialized Training Program, and they let us stay for the year, but before calling us up. I did not, in fact, wish to be drafted. I wished to have the quality of being a volunteer, and so I was assigned for that. Then I was called up in the spring of the next year, and '44, I think it was, and I was in training at Mineral Wells, Texas, for some time, and then I was released to the discharge, and I was sent from Boston overseas, and was put in charge of the. Not put in charge. I was put as a charge of the in the infantry, and the 95th Division Infantry, Company L. And because I had been specially trained as in communications, I was in headquarters company. But when we were engaged, as we were just north of Metz in France, in the war, and we were in the Third Army at that time, 95th Division, we were to march on to Metz vigorously, and we were told that we were going to indulge in what was called walking fire, and that was a process by which you held your gun in your hand and fired it at presumably the enemy. But we were actually in a wide open field, and there was no enemy around. But I will say that that was the first time I had actually been with a regular weapon in my hand, and it was a strange and an eerie sense to be there, possibly killing our fellow man. We did not, in the rest of the war, see any nearby Germans. I was not able to shoot anyone, and that was just as good. So I would like to tell my first story is the story of my initial entry into the war with the gun and an enemy not visible. And the last story, the second story that I wish to tell, was at the end of the war, when the war in Europe had ended, in fact, and we were being told we were going to go to Japan, naturally, to the Japanese theater, and so we were moved up to Harfleur in France to get on a ship. And while we were waiting there, the army encouraged us to be entertained, and so I went into town, to a nearby town, to see an opera that was being put on. And to my surprise and great pleasure, I discovered in the line with me a gentleman who was from Charleston also, and was a near neighbor and a distant cousin. And so we had a good time of reunion at that particular time. And I might just say that in simple gratitude for that experience, I married his daughter some time later. So but as she is also present with us here in this forest, I thought I would mention that. But those are my two significant activities in the war, yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. They're wonderful stories. I love the opera, and meeting your friend and then marrying his daughter.
Yes.
There's a story that you need to tell in more detail at another time. But thank you, George, for that wonderful
Thank
story.
you very much, Ed.
Jack Hughes, a distinguished veteran of who lives here at the Forest of Duke. You were a Navy doctor in World War II. Tell us something about that experience.
A few days after finishing an internship at Medical College of Virginia, I was called to active duty. And 10 days later, I received orders for overseas duty, which we all suspected would be for Europe. I was sent to a training station near Norfolk, Virginia, and then 10 days later, sent to Lido Beach, Long Island, for transport to duty overseas. We arrived in Europe in April and immediately began training for the Normandy invasion. On June the 6th of 1944, we joined a convoy about midnight headed for the Normandy beaches. Early briefing had told us that we would arrive at a secure Omaha beach at 8 o'clock, that we would promptly unload our guns and take on a few wounded and return to Southampton, England for another load of troops. That calmed everybody, and so about 4 o'clock in the morning, when I went topside to take a peek, things were a little anxious, but mostly calm as we prepared for an uneventful discharge of our cargo. But at 8 o'clock, as we approached the beach, we found that things were not quite as we had planned. And instead of a secured beach, there was a 3-mile carnage because the Allies were not able to knock out the German defenses because of the cloudy weather and the depth of the German defenses. we were, as we started into the beach, the ship immediately in front of us took a direct hit on the bow, and we were ordered to back out promptly, which we did, and took a secure anchoring spot. We were then told that there were hundreds of wounded against a seawall. They couldn't be evacuated because the German guns had pinpointed every inch of sand on the beach, and anything that moved that was blasted. However, about dark, we took on about 100 wounded, most of whom were walking wounded, and we were able to get them topside promptly. The 20 seriously wounded were another matter, and we had difficulty getting them atop because of the weather was getting rough by this time, and also we had a problem with seasickness of the corpsmen, and I was involved in that too. But somehow we got everybody taken care of before sunrise. But by that time, we were riding out the worst channel storm in 50 years, so we were unable to unload for 24 hours. We, on the D+2, we did unload, take on a few more wounded, and return to the Naval Hospital at Southampton. After transferring the patients to the hospital, we went directly to a loading dock where we took on a shipload of soldiers and supplies while we were unloaded, and then we headed directly back to Omaha Beach.
What an extraordinary story, Jack. All of us at the Forest will remember this story as we remember so many veteran stories, but that is a story to be remembered for all times. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Paul McBride, former Army Civil Affairs officer. This afternoon, Paul, I'd love for you to talk to us about your service in Vietnam in 1966, if I got the year right, at a time when the Army was building up and we were getting really into a very serious war in the country, and would continue in that war right down to 1973.
Well, let me first say that I am humbled and honored to have sat through George and Jack's remembrances of World War II. The war that I was involved in Vietnam was, as everyone knows, dramatically different. And I got into the military through ROTC because we had a draft. And the pitch that they gave us at Youngstown University when I started my freshman year was that I had a choice. I could either wait for the draft and go in as a buck private, or I could get $100 a month while I was going to school and go in as a lieutenant. So that's what I did. They gave me another year and a half to finish my master's degree, and then reeled me in. By that time, it was 1965. And I ended up in Vietnam in '66 with the 29th Civil Affairs Unit. We were attached to the Marines in I Corps, and I was in charge of a platoon. In Civil Affairs, a platoon, I think, was 8 people, but they were all specialists. And our job was to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people. And so the war caused an enormous transformation in me, because I come from a very conservative Catholic family. My folks were 100% pro Joe McCarthy. He was Irish and Catholic. And I went to Catholic grade school and high school, where I thought that the term godless atheistic communism was all one word. And so we were fighting the communists in Vietnam, and I had no objection to it, whatever. However, my stay in Vietnam really disillusioned me quickly. I didn't think that we had any idea what we were doing there. For example, when I got up to Phu Bai, I immediately began to visit all the villages in our area that we were responsible for. And at that time, the Marines were going to expand our Phu Bai base considerably and actually destroy a number of villages. And I was meeting the village chiefs, and they would walk me through their villages, and they were showing me where everyone was buried. Because in Vietnam, when someone passes away for a long period of time after that, when they have dinner, they set a place at the table for the person who was no longer with them. And so to have your ancestors buried, the village chiefs know exactly where everyone was buried, what family they belonged to. And like here, the dead reside in neighborhoods like they did when they were alive. So if you were a prominent member of the village, you had a monument, and he knew who every monument was honoring. And if you were an everyday person, why, you might not even have a marker, but he knew where it was. And they were pleading with the military not to expand the cantonment area, but we did it anyway. And the bitterness that caused lasted for a long time. I was later brought back to Da Nang East, where the Civil Affairs headquarters were, and General Walt's headquarters were. And we had just built a huge hospital just outside. USAID had built a huge hospital outside of our area, and a beautiful modern hospital. Nobody would go to it because we had turned it over to Catholics, and everybody was Buddhist, and the Catholics reminded them of the French occupation. And so it didn't take me long in Vietnam to think that we just didn't know what we were doing. We were making mistakes that were blatant, and they weren't minor ones. When I was back up at Phu Bai, I had connections with USAID. Our outfit had connections with USAID and the CIA to get materials to help rebuild villages and so on. And I needed some sheeting to replace people's roofs that had been destroyed in the war. But I couldn't do it on my own. We had a system whereby you had to get a counter-signature by a South Vietnamese officer. The one that I had to go see was in Hue, which was a few miles away. We drove up there. He had an office in a building. And I had to go, I waited in the anteroom before I could get in to see him. And he made it clear to me, I couldn't understand Vietnamese, and so we had to use translators, but he was cold, and he made it clear to me that unless I doubled my order, he wouldn't sign. And then he took the other half, and I presume he sold it on the black market. So I came out of the war in Vietnam, joined the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and remained an activist against the war for the next several years.
Paul, thank you for important insights into Vietnam and the mistakes we made there. And that may be the clearest exposition of those mistakes that I've heard in a long time. I've read a lot of books about Vietnam. The division that I served as a historian with, the 82nd, served there for 2 years. And that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Wes Steen, welcome to our interviews with veterans at the Forest Institute.
Thanks, John.
We are delighted to see you, and you're an interesting case because you may be one of the younger veterans that we're talking to. Your service came in the early 70s, and while we've had others who served in that period, to my mind, you're one of the youngest that we've talked to over the years. And you had significant service on an aircraft carrier. Tell us about your experience as an aviator team member on an aircraft carrier, which to me is probably one of the hardest things you can do in the service.
Well, thank you, John. I sat through the prior interviews, and I really feel a little bit embarrassed because all of them are really heroes of of real combat, and I'm not, but I'll do my best to give people a sense of my service time. When I was 20 years old, I pretty well felt that I was invincible and immortal. So, you know, it was a different mindset. I was in college with a 4-year deferral, but as a youngster, I'd always wanted to fly. I loved flying, and I think I sort of have an addiction to adrenaline rushes. I think there's some of that. But at any rate, I'd tried to buy private lessons, but was not able to put together enough money to do that. So one day, simply by chance, I was walking through the student union and ran into a Navy recruiter who assured me that he could fix that. So I went for the physical, and sure enough, they recognized that I had 20/25 vision, and unless it was perfect 20/20, the Navy won't let you be a pilot. So they said, I'll tell you what, we'll give you 80% of the training to be a pilot. You can get the other 20% on your own if you'll agree to fly as a naval flight officer, which means handling the computer systems and the weapon systems and that sort of thing. So that's what I did. As far as the experience goes, most of, this was right smack in the middle of the Vietnam War, 1968 that I began my service. And most of people ask me, what's it like to fly off an aircraft carrier? And I'll tell you that in my view, it's a non-event, because what happens is you get in the airplane. Aviators like to say you strap the airplane on as opposed to strap into the airplane. You strap the airplane on and you sit there until, in my case, the pilot went to full throttle, saluted the deck crew. They were ready. They got all their gauges and dials in the right position, and off you go. You go from 0 to about 160 miles an hour in 2.5 seconds. So you move along at quite a pace. A typical airplane, for those of you who have flown commercially, you take off in probably something like 3,000 feet. On an aircraft carrier, you do it in 300. So it moves pretty quick, and it's a pretty strong catapult shot. As soon as you feel a bump, and the bump is the catapult disengaging, and then the airplane sort of settles a little bit, and you hope that it quits settling. At some point, the pilot pulls the stick back, and you're climbing. So it's pretty much a non-event. Landing, though, is a different world. Every landing is an adventure. The landing spot, you got a tail hook on the airplane, tail hook drops down. The pilot has a window of about 28 feet wide, and well, maybe 35 feet wide, and about 45 feet long in order to put that hook down. To give you a reference, it's about the size of a tennis court, a little bit smaller than a tennis court, a singles tennis court. He's got to put it down. Now, the other problem he's got is that he's got to do that vertically as well. You've only got about a 2-foot variance that you can miss the altitude by. And then you're doing it in an airplane going 165 miles an hour. You're doing it with a rolling deck. You're doing it sometimes with a rolling deck. You're doing it sometimes after a very fatiguing mission. So it's an exciting thing, and it's particularly bad when you're doing it at night in the rain. And I've done that, and it's a miserable experience. You can't see anything, and what you can see, you can only see for a second or two, and it's just a mess. So landings are always very exciting, but I will say this and ask people to consider this. My life as a naval aviator was a very privileged life. I mean, it was genteel. It was it was exciting, but it was not the drudgery that the deck crew and the folks who do the hard work experience. I think an aircraft carrier flight deck during flight operations is probably one of the most dangerous places in the world. Getting from the island where you come out to get on the flight deck to your airplane was probably the most dangerous part of the day. And there are young men who work, or young men and women now, who work out there all day long hooking up airplanes, unhooking airplanes, fixing problems that are going on. They're working just feet away from aircraft intakes and exhausts. Anything that they would drop that would go into the intake would probably blow up the jet engine. One jet engine blowing up is going to blow up the airplane next to it. And all of that, and you can't hear anything. The noise is just impossible. You've got ear protection on, and you still lose hearing like I have. So those folks who do that work are the true heroes of this story. And there are some other heroes too. One are the folks who come back injured. One are the folks who just don't come back. One are the families who have to suffer those losses or take care of those people. And finally, I think the unsung heroes of the Navy are the families who put up with very long absences and try to hold a family together after or during long deployments, and that is really tough. So those folks, I would ask that you consider as much thank you for your service as the veterans.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wes. That was a wonderful story, and you're absolutely right.
Thank you.